Number 10. Just his bones and a beautiful memory. This one chokes me up every time. It's not only physically brutal, but emotionally brutal. Like so many superhero defeats that stick with me truly seem to be. In this case, it is Superman himself who is defeated by his friend and ally Wonder Woman. This all goes down in the story from outside of the main continuity, Wonder Woman Dead Earth. In this comic, Diana awakens in a post-apocalyptic world, where she seems to have forgotten what happened to the planet. There was a great war, and following it a great fire, and it is in issue 3 that she actually finds out the truth about what happened to this now dead Earth, and her involvement in that. What happened was the Great Fire, and the Great Fire was her. In the past, in Dead Earth, the Amazons attacked humankind, and while Diana attempted to lead peace talks between both sides, this ultimately fails, and then the humans decide to basically nuke Themyscira. Diana's full power is unleashed when her bracelets are removed, but it's not enough to stop the nuclear strike against her home. In the end, her mom, her sisters, her entire world are all destroyed and lost to her. Superman rushes to help, but also arrives too late after prioritizing his own parents, who also were victims of a nuclear attack in Smallville. Her power fully unleashed, heartbroken and filled with rage, Wonder Woman takes out her frustrations on Superman. The two fight, and ultimately this untethered and unlimited power that Diana has tapped into proves to be enough for her to destroy Clark after their fight also has obliterated the Earth via collateral damage. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that subscribe button? I know there's a bunch of you that aren't subscribed, so you know, if you want to subscribe, it helps us out. Number 9. The Justice League are dead. Welcome to Dark Crisis. Or really, welcome to Justice League issue number 75, the beginning of Dark Crisis. In this issue, the Justice League goes up against Pariah. Pariah used to be a scientist trying to stop the death of universes, who basically became corrupted when he was cursed to watch worlds end over and over again without being able to do anything to save them. I mean, to be fair, that would, I think, make pretty much anyone corrupted and kinda crazy. Pariah is back, and this time he intends to end the suffering of the multiverse by ending the heroes of the main continuity. He does this because he believes in destroying the main continuity he'll kind of be able to end the cycle of destruction, seeing it as kind of the root of the problem because the heroes from that reality have in essence meddled too much with the state of the multiverse. So he's like, in order for us to save the multiverse, we kinda gotta get rid of you guys. As a result, he seemingly handily defeats the Justice League in one go, blasting them with his own power after making them fight sort of the darkness, which is like an army of evil characters they fought before, but really it's just the darkness, leaving only Black Adam to survive, return to Earth, and tell the tale of what happened. Of course, the Justice League would return because, you know, this is comics, we gotta come back around to it. But still, this issue and their initial fate here was pretty wild. Number 8, and that will be the end of the X-Men forever! What can I say? I'm a sucker for the classics. This one comes to us from the old days of X-Men, the Jack Kirby and Stan Lee days. In issues number 17 and 18 of Uncanny X-Men, Magneto is revealed to be the villain who has infiltrated the X-Mansion, having returned from outer space where we last saw him be transported to by the Beyonder. He has returned to once more resume getting revenge on the X-Men and mankind. It isn't until the end of issue 17 that Magneto is revealed as he greets the parents of Warren Worthington III, aka mutant student Angel's parents, having handily defeated almost all the X-Men one by one after luring them to the mansion. Magneto's plan is to send them up in an air balloon, which is basically like attached to a metal ball that contains them. Fortunately, while initially defeated in issue number 17 and struggling to escape in issue number 18, Iceman ends up getting showcased as the true hero in this issue. Kinda helps save the day here, almost single-handedly defeating Magneto just as the X-Men escape their deadly air balloon fate and return to back him up. Number 7. You Are Not My Father. Probably one of the most emotional fights, especially when we consider that at the time we had a lot of complex emotions about, well, at least one of these people, happens between Professor Charles Xavier and his star pupil, Scott Summers, aka Cyclops. I'll let you guess about who he had complex feelings about. This one went down during the events of Avengers vs. X-Men. It happens at a tense time in the history of the X-Men, not just because they were up against and at conflict with the Avengers as a result of a debate about what to do with the incoming Phoenix Force, but because of the revelations that had happened in recent years in regards to Charles's more shady practices. Like, not telling his students that the danger room they were training in had actually itself become a sentient AI mutant who was in essence kind of being oppressed by the headmaster of the Xavier Institute, for example. In the end, Charles attempted to talk down Scott, who at this point had the full power of the Phoenix Force, or he takes the full power of the Phoenix Force during this fight, and uses it at his fingertips. Basically, he was also being corrupted by that. Himself filled with a bunch of complex feelings at the time in regards to Charles, Cyclops ends up refusing his once mentor's help, and instead kills him in a blaze of phoenix flames. Despite the fact that Charles at this point was a controversial figure, he was still, I would say, considered to be more hero than villain. And despite the fact that Cyclops himself is usually known for being a hero, he still defeated a man often also known for his own heroic and idealistic dreams. Number 6. The day the proudest, most noble man ever finally fell. Obviously, I'm kinda trimming down that quote a bit, but it just fits a little bit better in my point. What an iconic defeat. So iconic it not only shook the comic book world, but also the everyday world as well, making headlines. And sure, all in all, this was kind of a publicity stunt to help boost comic sales, but it also became a huge story for comic book fans everywhere to look back on for years to come. While Superman would return, his defeat against Doomsday and ultimate initial death in the comics would be felt the world over. The death of Superman is epic, and I personally always like coming back to it, not just for Clark himself, but for the characters that are a big part of his world. Lois and Jimmy, his parents, John and Martha. Ugh, makes me feel so many emotions. Also, why was Jimmy so handsome in the 90s? I ask myself that every time I return to Superman comics in the 90s. I'm like, Jimmy, you're looking real jacked. Number 5. Take heart, Kitty. Oof, this one hits me right in the feels. I go back to what it felt like the first time I read this one, and whoo, it got me. This defeat comes to us from the pages of one of my favorite ever X-books, I believe, the first volume of Marauders, which started back in 2019. I think this is one of my favorite X-books of all time. I mean, I have to really think about that and rank those, but pretty sure this is up there if it's not in the top 5. Although, I think it is in the top 5. For me. In issue number 6, we're caught off guard when Sebastian Shaw shows up on a boat where Captain Kate, the leader of the Marauders, has been left alone. Now for those who haven't been keeping up with, the Krakoa era X-Men stuff and what it means for Kitty Pryde, initially she had problems using the gates on the island and basically became the captain of a ship and the leader of the Marauders. Not Sinister's Marauders, not those Marauders. She was reclaiming the name for a heroic group of buccaneers that would basically sail the seas and help to free mutants in countries where they otherwise were not free, helping to bring them to Krakoa. And honestly, the team is also star-studded. Here, Kitty preferred to go by Kate. That is, until she died. Sebastian Shaw shows up to attack Kate with fast-growing Krakoa seeds. Considering she can't use the gates and currently can't phase through Krakoan materials, Kate becomes restrained as a result. Lockheed is netted and tossed overboard, and Kate is left to sink alone, along with the ship she is on, which Sebastian of course blows a hole in. This plot point is made even more devastating by the implication that Kate will not be able to be resurrected, as this plot point is made even more devastating by the implication that Kate will not be able to be resurrected by the Five as a result of her inability to interact with Krakoan gates. Number 4. Everything Cracked. The Final Crisis story is all about the brutal defeat of superheroes and really kind of like everyone on Earth. Final Crisis was the story of how Darkseid basically took over the world by broadcasting the anti-life equation to everyone on the planet via email, text, radio, and television broadcasts, basically making them realize that he is the one true ruler of everything, and so they may as well just give up and surrender to him. It was brutal, devastating, and honestly affected pretty much everybody in the comics. Eventually the heroes would manage to rise up and take back the planet, but for a while there, it was really bleak. Things got so bad that they even caused Batman to break his one rule against using guns in order to take on Darkseid. And this event started with the death of Martian Manhunter as well. Rough. Number 3. The one true enemy of the great Charles Xavier. Oh boy, we are going to the Ultimate Universe for this one, so you know it's gonna be brutal, right? This comes from the Ultimate X-Men series. Here, Sinister, who looks super different in this universe, so if you're like, wait a minute, who's that? That's Sinister? Yeah, it is. He infiltrates the X-Mansion and manages to sneak up on Charles Xavier himself, despite his immense telepathic powers. Xavier here is no match for Sinister, who takes him out of the security room he was in, where he was seemingly surveying his students. When Charles asks Sinister where he's taking him, Sinister responds that he's escorting Xavier to his one true enemy, and then he pushes him down some stairs. It's completely awful, really. Xavier isn't the only one who gets brutally and honestly insultingly messed up by Sinister in this issue. Angel also in this fight goes from being intimidating in one panel to basically mentally manipulated into choking himself against his will in another panel. So yeah. Which, I mean, I don't know. I kind of expect something like that for Angel, but Xavier? It's not fair. It's not very, that's terrible. Number 2, instead I will simply break you. Possibly one of the most powerful moments I've ever read in Batman comics. This epic issue that was an integral part of the Nightfall story is a whirlwind of a fight. And not only that, but overseen by a powerful inner monologue from Batman about all the wounds he has taken to get to this point that truly highlights the struggles that really sum up this character, who against all odds always comes out on top, right? Not this time. In issue number 497 of Batman, this was the moment that Bruce fell in his fight against Bane. Bane came to finish him, but rather than kill Batman, decided to simply leave him broken, breaking his back over his knee in that massive and iconic splash panel. Number 1, but I saved you. I did it. This one made me cry all over again as I sat at my desk and reflected on it, revisiting it again. Oh boy, okay. So here we're talking about the death of Spider-Man, which honestly happened more than once in the Ultimate comic book line and universe, but I do think that this is my favorite death. This is Spider-Man's death done right, is what I mean, in my mind. If you have to do it, obviously, because I don't think many of us would really ask for something this heartbreaking to happen, but you know, here we are, it happened, and it's so sad. During Ultimate Spider-Man issue 159 through to issue 160, we see Peter in his final fight. In the final moments of this final fight, unmasked and with nothing really left to lose, he is forced to give it his all to protect the people of New York City, and more specifically, his friends, his family, his loved ones, and the people of his own neighborhood. In the end, despite everything he does in this epic fight, which spans multiple issues, he is defeated by the Green Goblin. And the ultimate version of the Green Goblin is an unstoppable, and as we later find out, immortal tank of a villain. This fight and defeat has it all though. Ups, downs, it's an emotional, action-packed roller coaster. And while Spider-Man does seemingly die, so seemingly does Norman Osborn as well in the end. So while this is a defeat, there's also at least some poetic justice felt in the end too. But goodness, Aunt May, whew. Boy, do I feel for Aunt May here. Oh, it's so awful. Number 10, Sentry. And the circle of people getting ripped in half continues. It's a vicious circle indeed, let me tell you. Sentry is often actually a perpetrator of this kind of gruesome and brutal death, but this time around he was on the receiving half of this murder method. This all went down during the King in Black event. When Null first arrived on Earth, Sentry was one of the first heroes to attempt to stand up against him and defeat him. Being the Sentry, he egotistically assumed he would easily be powerful enough to defeat Null. While Sentry tried to rip him in half, it was Null who managed to get a solid enough grip on Bob Reynolds to tear him asunder. Sentry would then be escorted by Valkyrie, aka Jane Foster, to the halls of Valhalla, and while on their way there, another shocking revelation would come to light. That some of the Valkyries were still alive, trapped, but alive, and upon being found by Jane and Sentry and freed, were able to kind of return once more. Pretty cool. It should be noted too that Sentry's death and defeat was also so shocking because it took place in issue number 1 of the King in Black series, in essence being one of the defeats that kicked off this event.
Elektra. You could say that Elektra was a victim of the well-known Daredevil villain Bullseye, but you could also say she was a victim of Frank Miller's gripping and at times very dark writing. In issue number 181 of Daredevil Volume 1, we watch Elektra and Bullseye square off in a bloody battle, which ultimately ends in Bullseye spearing Elektra right through the stomach and out her back. It's a really brutal event that changes Daredevil as a character entirely from that point on. And it's important to remember that in 1982, which is when that issue was released, a death like this for such a well-known hero wasn't quite as common as what we might be used to today. And it's not like she was resurrected again either, which is usually how this type of thing goes. She is completely done in the Daredevil timeline, only showing up in her own limited series and a couple other comics here and there.
Number 8, Batman. Although it doesn't seem surprising on paper, when Batman was seemingly killed by Darkseid, it caught a lot of folks off guard. That is because Batman is such a mainstay. He isn't a character that dies often, and definitely not in a way that feels as permanent as this if he does die. Although the idea of Batman being killed by Darkseid might not seem that surprising, because I mean Darkseid's pretty OP, Batman actually had a pretty decent plan for taking the villain out, and actually was successful using a radion bullet. Batman successfully hit Darkseid in the chest, but not before his Omega beams could do their work. Although it seemed as though Batman was obliterated as a result of being hit by the Omega beams, it turned out that what had actually happened was a power called the Omega Sanction, which is also kind of what Darkseid's Omega beams are. And those had been used to transport Batman back through time, so he would return, but not before having weird time travel adventures.
Wolverine. While Wolverine has faced his death at the hands of Sentinels before, which actually results in his death, sort of, I figured that I would cover one of his defeats that doesn't really end in his death, but I'd say it's even more shocking and brutal, so here it is. It's when the Punisher shoots Wolverine in the face and then decides to run him over with a steamroller. This shocking and quite ridiculous defeat takes place in The Punisher number 17 and is rather uncalled for given how brutal it is. Wolverine is just sort of intervening in one of Frank Castle's missions, which, to be fair, Wolverine does do a lot, but it doesn't constitute shooting his face skin off and then flattening him into the ground with a steamroller. It's just a rough scene to witness, and I think the Punisher needs to apologize.
Number 6. Tim Drake. Recently, Robin, Tim Drake, had a big glow up. He came out as bisexual and was celebrated in his very own Pride issue. However, even the fact that the character seems to be coming up more into his own and uplifted for his sense of identity could not protect him from an awful demise that was just around the corner. Enter Batman issue number 125. Here Batman and Robin go up against Penguin and come face to face as well with Clayface. But what makes it even worse is while they were attempting to evacuate a charity gala whose attendees' lives Penguin was threatening, Robin got taken out by a goon with a gun. Just a goon with a gun. Ugh, brutal. While Robin would be stabilized, it was pretty shocking to see a character who had recently been so celebrated for identity and diversity taken out so easily and on the brink of life or death. Also, note to self, never attend a charity gala in Gotham. It pretty much never ends well.
Captain Marvel, or Marvel, the dude one. This is sort of a sad entry because he isn't defeated by any one villain, nor does he come back from it like some others may on this list. The culprit in this case is actually cancer. I don't know what happened in 1982, but this event was also published in 1982 like the Elektra thing, and was actually known as the first graphic novel to be released by Marvel. It was called The Death of Captain Marvel, of course, and it chronicled the adventures of Marvel venturing into a dark dimension where he's exposed to compound 13, which is a nerve gas that gives him an incurable cancer. He's then visited by friends on the planet Titan, even getting a courtesy convoy sent over by the Skrulls, who pay their respects in his final moments. The craziest part about this is that Captain Marvel doesn't ever come back, save for one time when the Grandmaster brings him back briefly as a kind of ghost, but other than that, he's known to be out of the comics for good after this one. Sad.
Number 4. Captain Kate. One of the most shocking defeats and demises happened not really to just Kate, but also to Lockheed. Poor Lockheed. Not Lockheed, leave Lockheed alone. This all went down in volume 1 of Marauders from 2020. At the end of issue number 6, Kitty Pryde faces off with Sebastian Shaw, who, while considered to be a mutant who is allied with the nation of Krakoa, and so in that respect is technically a hero, I guess, has also a history of being a really nasty villain. And that is exactly what he was up to here. He kills Kate in cold blood by exploiting her weakness that at the time she struggled to phase through Krakoan organic material and gates. So he found some fast growing vine pods and unleashed them on her while trapping Lockheed in a net, which he then dropped into the sea, and then promptly sinking the boat she was aboard. One of the worst things about this too is Kate is even like, look, you can have all the seats on the Hellfire Trading Company. I don't care, just please let me save Lockheed. And Shaw's like, no. Considering that Kate was basically the main character of this series who possibly could not be resurrected, it was pretty shocking at the time. I was shocked. I was very shocked.
At number 3 is Superman. Back in 1992, a comic book called The Death of Superman was published, in which Superman is actually killed by Doomsday. The battle rages on for quite a while against this hyper-adaptable villain, with Superman showing serious signs of exhaustion as Metropolis gets more and more damaged. This being a multi-issue publication, the actual death of Superman takes place in issue number 75, which is quite a while into the series. And while it's easy for us to find that issue online today, Back then, readers were waiting months to see what happened to their favorite Kryptonian. I mean, with a title like that and leaving the event right to the end, I sort of rank this as more of a publicity stunt than anything else, but whether there is marketing involved or not, there's no doubt that this event was a shock to fans, who at the time were unsure if they'd ever see another Superman comic again. Thankfully though, but also sort of expectedly, DC then released Reign of the Supermen, which chronicled the return of the hero and is known to have sold just about the same number of copies as the death of Superman.
Number 2. Green Arrow. Green Arrow's death was quite startling because he was basically kind of the person behind it. Rather than do something, he sort of just let himself be killed and defeated. And I know there's probably going to be Oliver Queen fans in the comments. They're going to be like, no, he sacrificed himself. But look, it just seems a little silly to me, okay? While beaten by the enemy, he also just kind of gave up. This all went down when Oliver Queen was blown up by a bomb that threatened to detonate upon arriving in Metropolis. Rather than let that happen or give up his arm, which was stuck in the detonator case or chamber, he decided to just surrender and sacrifice himself to save innocent people, allowing himself and the plane he was in to basically be blown up. The really crazy part of this story is that Superman was right there, and while he wasn't coming up with any amazing ideas, other than one that would cause Green Arrow to lose his arm in exchange for his life, which Green Arrow was definitely not willing to do, Soup still likely could have done something else that would save Metropolis and Ollie, and likely have allowed him to keep his arm as well, because after all, this is Superman we're talking about. If only he'd had the time to think of something better. It is hard to think of things on the spot, especially when, you know, a bomb is about to explode, so fair enough.
Finally, at number 1, we have Peter Parker. I only don't call him Spider-Man in this entry because firstly, this is the Earth 1610 Peter Parker, and secondly because he's from the Ultimate Spider-Man series. And either way, the Spider-Man mantle is still very much alive, obviously. But this is still one of the most brutal and unexpected defeats for any superhero, partly because Peter Parker is still only a teenager in this issue where he meets his fate. That, and partly also because his final battle takes place right outside of his house in front of his friends and family. Facing off against the Sinister Six in a multi-issue battle, Peter is entirely helpless, getting ravaged over and over again by the group of villains, and no one really comes to his rescue, other than Aunt May, who actually takes out Electro with a revolver. Spanning between issues 156 and 160 of Ultimate Spider-Man, this loss takes its time and ends with deafening silence as Aunt May and MJ cry over Peter's dead body, and the series just ends. It's a rough defeat that some people forget about, maybe because it's not from our dimension. But hey, it's still a young Spider-Man dying at the hands of a huge gang of bad guys, no matter which way you splice it.
Number 10. Werewolf by Night. One of the first appearances of Moon Knight actually involved a two-part fight with none other than Werewolf by Night. What a brutal introduction to the Marvel Universe. This fight turned team-up took place in Werewolf by Night issue 32 and issue 33 in the 1972 series, the first series of Werewolf by Night. Here, Moon Knight made quick work of Werewolf by Night, not just tormenting him with punches, but also with scathing insults besides. How rude. However, while Werewolf by Night appeared to be no match for Moon Knight, in the end the hero decided to lay down his arms, realizing that Werewolf by Night wasn't the villain he'd thought he was, and the two instead decided to team up to take on a common enemy that had actually turned Moon Knight against Werewolf by Night in the first place. Number 9. Midnight. Although Midnight would go on to become a villain in the comics, originally he was actually simply the son of a villain who wanted to become a hero himself. Midnight is Jeff Wild, the son of Midnight Man. Moon Knight fought against and defeated Midnight Man, and Jeff ended up confronting Moon Knight as a result. But in the end, Jeff decides to actually work with his father's enemy, wanting to become a hero like Moon Knight, and ending up as his sidekick for a time, until he appeared to be disintegrated by number 7 of the Secret Empire. Not to be confused with the Marvel event Secret Empire. This is a group, not an event. Midnight, however, would return and end up fighting Moon Knight, Spider-Man, and a team of heroes, wanting revenge on his former partner who he believed had abandoned him after his supposed death. Of course, Moon Knight probably just thought he was dead, but you know how it is when you're not actually dead, and you're like, you should have known that I wasn't really dead, man, even though it looked like I was disintegrated. This version of Midnight was a cyborg who had also been trained by and kind of brainwashed into joining the Empire. In the end, Midnight was defeated by Moon Knight with some pretty vital help from Spider-Man, and the convenient assist of Empire's headquarters collapsing. Yay. Although I don't think that was the end of Midnight. I think Midnight may have even come back after that, but yes, don't quote me. And friends, before we move on to our next spot, just a quick reminder, if you are loving Moon Knight and you want to learn even more about him, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Then we can give you more Moon Knight lists. Number 8. Dark Hawk. In the Infinity War event, Moon Knight got to take on a slew of evil doppelgangers of heroes, including Dark Hawk. A lot of these fights are short, but it's neat to see Moon Knight take on so many alternate versions of Marvel superheroes at once. For those not familiar, Dark Hawk is Chris Powell, once a teen who stumbled upon a mysterious amulet and was forever changed by it, becoming the hero Dark Hawk. The amulet allows Chris to swap his consciousness with that of the Dark Hawk android, Shi'ar tech melded with magic, which comes with super strength, speed, durability, flight, a form of self-healing, concussive blasts, and more. In the end, Dark Hawk proved no match for Moon Knight, who made quick work of him by smacking him with his adamantium staff, or truncheon if you will. That's what he prefers to call it, truncheon. I think I'm saying that right too. It's not trunch eon, is it? Probably not. I've never used a truncheon myself, but that's just based on how it's written, I'm assuming. Number 7. Daredevil. Daredevil and Moon Knight have fought one another in a team-up where Moon Knight came out on top thanks to the bombardment of loud noises and his adamantium truncheon before deciding to work together. But he's also squared off with Daredevil's evil doppelganger as well in his Infinity War tie-in. Here Moon Knight has some help from other heroes, but also ends up being the one to take down evil Dop DD, as well as a whole slew of others who gang up on him in the end. Though thankfully he is shortly thereafter joined by some reinforcements as other heroic colleagues show up to help with basically the army of evil doppelgangers that are wreaking all kinds of havoc still. These doppelgangers, they never end, they're endless. Number 6. Black Knight. Another evil doppelganger that Moon Knight comes up against during the Infinity War tie-in is Black Knight. Now granted, this isn't the real Black Knight, but it is a version of him. Black Knight and Moon Knight squaring off is also something that is just neat to see because they're both kind of like opposing knights in terms of design at least. Black Knight is a medieval inspired knight dressed all in dark, Dane Whitman, who typically fights with the ebony blade, and Moon Knight is an Egyptian inspired mummy looking dude dressed all in white and here fighting with his adamantium staff. Though Moon Knight fights with a slew of different weapons as well in the comics. Number 5. Deadpool. Wade Wilson is known for being pretty unstoppable with his healing factor and his rad merc moves, but not so unstoppable that Moon Knight can't stop him. These two duke it out as a result of a misunderstanding in Vengeance of Moon Knight issue number 7, and fought once more in the next issue over a difference of vigilante ideologies in issue number 8. Moon Knight both times makes pretty quick work of Deadpool, not being able to fully kill him of course because of his healing factor, which is kinda just what Moon Knight wanted and needed anyway in this fight. Someone he could go all out on without the fear of killing them. So it's kind of a perfect match. The other thing that makes these two going head to head so interesting is the fact that they both have their own mental health issues and both are known for hearing and talking to voices in their head, which makes for some pretty cool moments and pretty fun dialogue. As different as Deadpool and Moon Knight are, they share a lot of similarities as well. There's a lot of like neat overlap there even though they're very different. Different but similar. Number 4. Beast. During his Infinity War tie-in, Mark Spector Moon Knight issue number 43, Moon Knight also faces off against an evil doppelganger of Beast, aka Hank McCoy. The battle ends up being more tricky than when he faced Black Knight. Moon Knight actually has to employ some quick thinking to beat Hank's evil alternate, and it seems that both are evenly matched momentarily, with both applying lessons they are learning about one another in battle to their tactics. However, in the end, Moon Knight manages to out-strategize even the evil version of one of the most intelligent X-Men members. After Moon Knight defeats Beast's evil counterpart, Hank himself congratulates him for his quick thinking, complimenting his style. Real Hank, not a evil Hank, just to be clear. Number 3. Black Panther. Well, really, Moon Knight survived a fight with Black Panther, but just as it seemed he was defeated, he did get back up and end up with the Phoenix Force merged to him, so I think we can call that a win for Moon Knight. If a fight ends with you getting an insane level of power like the Phoenix Force, you're winning, at least in the long run in my mind, even if you had to take a smackdown on your way to getting said power. These two duke it out in issue number 36 of the 2018 Avengers series, which I believe is considered volume 7. Moon Knight seems convinced that Black Panther is not himself, but is actually Mephisto, and fights against his Wakandan teched-out suit, as well as Black Panther's own fighting skills, prowess, and power behind said suit. In the end, Black Panther ends up knocking him to the ground, but decides not to end Moon Knight. However, Moon Knight is then still able to finish his prayer, and is rewarded with the Phoenix Force, which bonds with him, making him nigh invincible. Number 2. Spider-Man. Moon Knight ends up facing off against Spider-Man after mistakenly believing he was the one responsible for a building being blown up. In truth, it wasn't Spidey behind the explosion, but the two still ended up duking it out on a rooftop. This happened not in the main continuity, but in the reality of Earth 1610, with 1610 Peter and 1610 Mark Spector, aka Moon Knight. While Spider-Man proved to be a pretty powerful opponent for Moon Knight, in the end Spider-Man still decided to run away rather than continue to fight the vigilantes, so I think we can consider that a win for Moon Knight. I feel like he scared Spider-Man enough that he was like, why am I even still staying here? I'm just gonna get out of here. I'm not gonna fight you. You're nuts. Number 1. Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel is handily defeated by Moon Knight during the same story that Black Panther squares off with him in The Age of Khonshu. In issue number 35 of the 2018 Avengers series, he approaches Iron Man and Carol Danvers, aka Captain Marvel, attempting to take the baby star brand Brandy Selby from them, as Khonshu needs her power. Catching Carol off guard, Moon Knight is able to restrain her quickly and then tosses her in the trunk of Ghost Rider, aka Robbie Reyes' car, which he also has access to after taking Ghost Rider's powers. Carol is wrapped up in chains and also has to deal with what appears to be a tentacle monster in the trunk. Although she does escape, she ends up flying away, choosing to run, or rather fly, from Moon Knight, then face him. Of course, she takes Tony and Baby Starbrand with her so they can regroup, but I'd still call making someone as powerful as Captain Marvel retreat a win for Moon Knight here. Granted, he is a very OP Moon Knight at this point in the story, because he's already beaten a lot of other heroes too. Which is why we should maybe do a part 2 to this list, because there's some that I didn't get to mention.
Kicking off the list at number 10, the Ringmaster. Issue 3 of the Incredible Hulk back in volume 1, we see the Hulk take on the Ringmaster. Will the mighty Hulk be a match for the Ringmaster? Well, apparently, yeah. He takes on a whole circus of crime who, might I add, do not have any superpowers, but right off the bat, the Human Cannonball gets the Hulk quite good. The Human Cannonball, just a regular guy with a makeshift hammer. This dude's spine would fold on impact if he cannonballed into the Incredible Hulk, so already I'm upset. And then it gets worse. A regular guy with a fireman's hose blasts the Hulk, and then he goes down, this time for good. I mean, I know the Hulk's mind was being toyed with here a bit, but the fact that a crime circus was able to best him in the first place, not okay. Not okay. Number 9, Doc Ock. In Eric Larson's 1992 Spider-Man run, issue 19 titled Revenge of the Sinister Six showed us a more powerful version of Doc Ock because he had new fancier arms. In fact, the whole crew had the jump on Peter at this point. He was for sure in need of backup. And right on cue, the Hulk smashes through the floor, just sending wood chips all over the damn place. Already such a mess. And he's coming in hot too. The Hulk says knock knock when he busts out of the floor. That is so badass. First he flicks Shocker out of the way, gives him the finger, literally, and then he tosses Mysterio back to sleep. And then when he goes to handle Doc Ock, he's caught off guard from his unbreakable arms with limitless power. Doc Ock had the upper hand, or 4 upper hands, I guess, in this case. And before we continue on with this list, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, that would be awesome. No sweat, but it does help us out quite a bit. I'm not going to waste any more time. Thank you so much. For the best. Back to this list. Number 8, the Hulk Killer. With a name like that, you already know how this one's going to end. Created by Sam Stearns, the leader, Hulk Killer first appeared in Tales to Astonish, issue 86. Some detectives are going through the leader's notes. They're finding out that he's created these humanoids, but the Hulk destroyed them all but one. This humanoid was built specifically to take down the Hulk, so the cops call in General Ross. They figure this ought to be an asset in some way, shape, or form for the government, but if only they could bring it to life, because, you know, what would possibly go wrong? So they bring him to life, and it all goes wrong. He just leaves, he walks right out of the building, not even fazed one bit by the bullets, of course. Then the Hulk arrives, they battle it out, and they break their surroundings, but Hulk Killer just simply absorbs all these hits. Next, Hulk Killer beats Hulk so hard, he reverts back into his banner form. It's embarrassing. Number 7, Juggernaut. Kane Marco has been one of Marvel's biggest and baddest since his first appearance in X-Men issue 12. Once Marco came into contact with a gem, he then obtained the power of the Crimson Bands of Sidorak, becoming a human Juggernaut. Literally. The Hulk on average can beat Juggernaut, but in Incredible Hulk issue 402, Hulk bumps into this Jack dude who he realizes is not just an ordinary construction worker after all, rather it's Marco. Hulk thinks he has him. He tries to save Juggernaut's life after he falls into quicksand, but then he tries to pull Hulk in as well, so Hulk's like, alright, forget it, I'm gonna let you sink. See ya. Then of course he popped out of the quicksand and the beating continued, and it kept going and going, and the Hulk went down until he was almost dead. And that's when Red Skull stepped in and told Kane that was enough beating for now. Number 6, Zax. Making its first appearance in the Incredible Hulk issue 166, the Thing from the Dynamo was originally the result of an accident that happened at Edison Nuclear Power Plant. When a group of criminals tried to power off New York City, it went south, the toughest gang in town, shutting down the power during Game of Thrones. That's truly, truly awful. Keep it up, guys. So guns started blazing and it caused this massive chain reaction in the atomic reactor, and then this living energy then absorbed them, and then soon took a humanoid form with a villain voice as well, of course. Zax absorbs the electricity from its victims' minds as well, so it gains their thoughts. Hawkeye comes in with a convenient foam arrow. In fact, Hawkeye's aim saved the day here, but they don't give him credit. They actually give the Hulk the credit, which is pretty rough. But don't worry, Hulk got what was coming from Zax when General Ross merged with the living energy and then beat down Hulk and Rick Jones. Ross was actually about to finish the pair off, but Zax's personality came back and then he flew off. That was a close call, Banner. A little too close. Number 5, Brian Banner. The father of Bruce Banner was honestly a pretty horrible guy. He killed Bruce's mother is honestly pure evil, and he of course was locked away for 15 years afterwards, and then when him and Bruce reunited down the road, Bruce accidentally killed him. Yikes. Now this isn't the end of his story though, because during the Chaos War storyline in Incredible Hulk's issue 619, his dad comes back as a Hulk demon who would get stronger the angrier Banner got. Now obviously this is a traumatic experience, going down memory lane can hurt quite a bit, so this demon Hulk dad would have finished off Bruce if Jarella didn't step in to save the day. Bruce has the brain and Brian's got the pain. The Banners are a wild bunch. Number 4, Horfin. Born the offspring of a frost giant and Fenris, Horfin first appeared in the Incredible Hulk issue 422. When the Warriors 3 and the Hulk were going after Agamemnon, they followed them to Singard Castle. Horfin was created purely to guard this castle, so now the Hulk has to fight a frost wolf. And this is pretty intimidating because when the frost giant Singard himself unleashed his Horfin, the order was to kill the Hulk right off the bat. No warning, nothing, just go eat him, bye, go. And it did, yeah. I did mention this wolf was incredibly big, right? What a snack. Number 3, Pit. Image Comics introduced Pit in Youngblood issue 4. It was their version of the Hulk. He's an alien-human hybrid created by the Creed as a literal death machine. So 5 years later, Marvel gave the fans the ultimate battle and released Hulk Pit Reality Check. This was just 50 pages of punching and smashing and kicking. It's exactly what you would expect and want. But Pit remained on top for the most part of this fight, and you gotta include Image Comics whenever we can, because Pit is a treat. He's also drooling and jacked. He's just a nightmare. I would never want to deal with him. Number 2, Thanos. This is the only movie reference in this list, but I do have to include it. The time Thanos punched the Hulk in the neck so hard that the beast straight up retired. Avengers Infinity War, directed by the lovely Russo brothers, before the title card even pops up in the movie, before it's like, bam, Avengers, the Incredible Hulk is gone. You don't see him anymore. He pops out and tries to get the upper hand on Thanos, and without even using the Power Stone, Thanos rock and boppers his neck. Now, we don't see the Hulk after this for 5 whole years. And even then, he's like taking selfies and dabbing. It's not the same at all. And finally, number 1, Maestro. Maestro comes from an alternate future on Earth 9200, the Future Imperfect storyline. Now this takes place 90 years in the future, and that Hulk had basically just absorbed all this radiation from our fallen planet over time. He gets stronger, and unfortunately he also gets smarter. This isn't a dumb Hulk that gets, hosed down at a circus. This is the Maestro we're talking about. So our Incredible Hulk goes to fight him, but on the way into the massive city of Dystopia, appropriately named, Hulk finds all these weapons and artifacts from all of our fallen heroes. This new world was much harder to survive in, even with superpowers. And that's when Hulk meets up with his old friend, Rick Jones. Rick fills Banner in that basically everybody's dead except for those residing in Maestro's dystopia. He would keep the radiation level low enough for people to survive, but he would also keep it high enough for him to continue being powered up. Maestro ends up Minecrafting his way to Jones' secret base, and the two Hulks come face to face. Now part 2 of the story is obviously just a massive fight. Maestro is terrifying. He calls Banner out on a bluff, and then he just tosses a lady to smithereens. Like, he actually doesn't care. He'll kill anybody in his way. It's terrifying. Hulk hits him where the sun doesn't shine, and Maestro sneaks up and breaks his neck, ending the battle and the story just like that.
Number 10, Omega Red. While Omega Red has also lost to Wolverine in the past, he's also had his fair share of victories against him. Omega Red initially proved almost too powerful to Wolverine, especially when it came to the use of death spores, which weakened him. There was a time when Omega Red successfully captured the hero, and he only succeeded in surviving by getting help to escape, unfit to take on Omega Red alone. More recently in the comics, Omega Red surfaced wanting to join Krakoa, but he was actually revealed to be in league with Dracula, and in fact helped Dracula to get his hands on Wolverine's blood, enabling the villain to walk in the sun. Since then, Omega Red has chosen to portray Dracula being truthful with the mutants and becoming their true ally, but Logan of course still finds it hard to trust him. He doesn't really believe he's the true ally. Perhaps because Wolverine himself remembers all the times that Omega Red has stabbed him in the front and the back, and just basically stabbed him all around with his carbonadium tentacles. Number 9, Mysterio. Mysterio in an alternate reality completely defeats Wolverine, and in the most horrible way. In the Old Man Logan continuity, Mysterio manipulated Wolverine, getting him to fight against and kill all the X-Men, explaining how this could have happened given all their amazing abilities by claiming that his friends would likely hesitate to take him out. Wolverine at the time thought he was taking on a bunch of supervillains who had invaded the mansion, and Mysterio also claims that Wolverine's ego is kinda to blame for him accepting the illusion. After all, Wolverine believing that he could have possibly taken on all of these supervillains himself all at once does seem pretty arrogant. I gotta say, I kind of agree with Mysterio here. And friends, before we move on to the next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists where we get to tell you stories about people kicking other people's butts, I love telling these stories, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8, Sabretooth. Sabretooth has beaten Logan so many times that I've personally lost count. Sometimes it seems as though Victor's sole purpose has been to make Wolverine suffer. Case in point, how it became a tradition for Sabretooth to go and mess up Wolverine once a year on his birthday. Sabretooth has also been the mastermind behind a great deal of psychological plots to mess with Logan, including at one point pitting his son Daken against him, forcing Wolverine to kill his own son. Wolverine thought this was how it had to be at the time, but he would actually later learn that it all happened due to the machinations of Sabretooth. People don't often think about how smart Sabretooth is, but he's pretty crafty. Number 7, Mystique. Mystique is one of those villains you don't want to underestimate because, well, it's really dangerous to do so. Case in point, why do I say case in point so much? Who's been saying that to me that I've been putting this in my script? An example being when Wolverine thought he had killed her and would never see her again, only for her to return having been resurrected by the Hand to get revenge on Wolverine for killing her. She not only defeated him in a physical sense, but also in a mental sense, using him to get information and also to mess with his head when she posed as Yukio. She really messed with him. But that's Mystique for you. Number 6, Spore. While Spore was an insanely powerful villain who did end up defeated in the end, it wasn't actually Wolverine that did the defeating in this scenario. Though he did fight against Spore. Spore appears in one of the earlier stories in Wolverine Volume 2 and was created by Archie Goodwin and John Byrne. It was an ancient entity who first appeared in issue 21, where we learned that the that was being used to increase the strength of Roundhouse at the cost of his sanity was actually a part of that villain, and that using that kind of how it infected its victims and was able to move more into the physical world through them. Spore, it turned out, was an ancient bioweapon created by the Deviants long ago that had laid dormant on planet Earth after requiring the strength of a Celestial in order to be defeated the first time around. Although Wolverine struggled to defeat this enemy, the possibly mutant healer Sister Salvation managed to use her powers to defeat it, cleansing Spore permanently, but at great cost, with her hands and possibly ability to heal becoming dramatically damaged afterwards. But Wolverine couldn't have done that alone. He needed the Sister Salvation backup for that one. Number 5. Madeline Pryor. Another enemy who Wolverine likely wouldn't stand a chance against is Madeline Pryor. In the What If Inferno issue, we get to see what would happen if Madeline Pryor had won the day and she and Sim basically turned Wolverine into their little pet, unleashing his feral side and making him a complete monster. And I really do mean a complete monster. The hero doesn't even stand a chance against their influence as they help him to give in to the darker side of himself that he's always been working so hard to repress. It's even worse than losing a battle or his life, because in this story, Wolverine loses his morality and basically his humanity. I think that's worse. Is that worse than death? I think it's worse than death. If you lose entirely who you are. Number 4. Dracula. Dracula is a long-standing villain for the X-Men and Wolverine. As we discussed earlier with Omega Red, the villain recently managed to best Wolverine by concocting a plan to capture him and use his blood to power up himself and his other loyal vampires, forcing Omega to become his undercover agent on Krakoa. Of course, in the end, Omega Red would turn against him, allowing Wolverine and the other mutants to strike back, but during that first story of the new series back in issue 1, Wolverine saw himself pretty heartily defeated at the hands of Dracula, and what made it worse is that he didn't really even understand at the time that he had been playing right into Dracula's hands. Number 3. Magneto. Magneto is of course another major supervillain who bested Wolverine. He was the one responsible for transforming him into a feral version of himself, stripping Wolverine of the adamantium that coated his skeleton. This was a huge part of us learning more about Wolverine's abilities and his power set. This was when it was revealed that his claws were actually bone claws and they were themselves coated. We also learned here that he had the capacity to be intensely feral. I mean, we'd always known that Wolverine had a wild side, a feral side. It had been alluded to in the comics, but we didn't know just how wild Logan could be. Don't worry though, although Wolverine lost all of his adamantium in the fight against Magneto and his nose, Professor X made sure that Magneto paid for what he'd done, and that he could never hurt anyone again by completely cutting off his mind, in essence kinda leaving Magneto still physically alive but brain dead. It should also be noted that Magneto has killed Wolverine many times across multiple different realities and timelines. Number 2. Apocalypse. Apocalypse is a villain that Wolverine has faced across many different realities, whether with a team or on his own. In some realities, Wolverine has managed to eventually win the war against Apocalypse, but has also lost battles here and there along the way. In the X-Men animated series from the 90s, we see no exception, as Wolverine attempts to take on Apocalypse alongside the X-Men. When it's his turn to strike, he completely misses Apocalypse with his claws, who manages to escape along with most of his horsemen. Kind of embarrassing. Number 1. Dark Phoenix. While Jean Grey would likely never want to hurt Wolverine, and he has honestly almost killed her on a few occasions across the multiverse, always to her benefit of course, usually, to avoid her having to suffer. When Dark Phoenix emerges, it's quickly made apparent just how much stronger this persona and force is in comparison to Wolverine. When the darker side of Phoenix Force makes itself known at one point during Phoenix Endsong, Wolverine doesn't stand a chance against it. In fact, he only survives his fight with the Dark Phoenix because he fits into her plan, with her aiming to use him as bait. It does seem as though he succeeds in weakening the Dark Phoenix, but once again, this seems to all be part of the Phoenix Force's plan, allowing her to take a more active role as she works towards getting what she wants, which she thinks at the time is Cyclops and his unlimited energy source, his optic blasts, but in reality what Phoenix really wants is to feel whole again and feel loved. What a lovely little moral at the end of that story.
Number 10. Clowned around. Okay, we're going back old school for this one right off the bat. Kathy Kane entered Detective Comics in issue 233. She was a circus trapeze artist who turned into Batman, the usual, you know? She was a pretty big deal in comics. She was around from 1956 to 1979, so she was around for 252 issues. She was a part of the Bat family. So what happened? How did she go out? Was it heroic? No, not at all. How did a well-trained Batwoman get taken out? Well, let's answer that question. Now at this point, she was retired. She was still running a circus, but nonetheless she was retired. She wasn't choking out bad guys anymore. The League of Assassins find her, and then it turns into this brawl, even with Batman showing up at one point. Now Batman is useless. He gets knocked out, and then when he wakes up, everything's done. The action's done. Kathy Kane is on the ground holding onto her batsuit, and that's the end of her. That's the last time we see her. That is issue 485. That's the end of Kathy Kane. Okay, there's no big fight really. There's no closing statement. She didn't save Batman's life. She didn't save anyone at the circus to, you know, it's just, we don't see it. Just a big L. Just a big old L. Readers were upset because all this time, and that's how you write Kathy Kane out, just to make Batman darker and to make his arc more cool and Gotham-like. Sure, okay. Number 9, Forgotten Foe. In Avengers issue 57, Vision joins the team. Now the issue is pretty deep because the team is trying to figure Vision out, where he came from, what his demeanor is, all that jazz. All he knows is that Ultron created him to attack the Avengers, which is pretty threatening from a guy who can walk through walls. So we start asking Hank Pym what he knows, but amnesia makes that a difficult task. Now he finally remembers what happened. He remembers that Ultron started to become a problem. So Hank turned himself into Goliath to defend himself, but in doing so, he went super big and he hit his head off the ceiling of the room he was in. Because, of course that happened. Hank's head versus stucco. He grew big and then he knocked himself out, and that's why he couldn't remember anything. Honestly, it makes a lot of sense. Pretty embarrassing, but it checks out. And before we continue on with this list, if you want to go ahead and give us a thumbs up, that would be super awesome. It's super helpful for our channel. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Now let's get right back to this list. Number 8, Paint It Yellow. All-Star Batman and Robin, the Boy Wonder. The duo goes toe-to-toe with Green Lantern, and the trick here, if you want to beat the crap out of a Green Lantern, is to paint everything yellow. If the Simpsons family got naked and fought Green Lantern, there's a good chance they might win. Green Lantern is surprised by this 12-year-old boy's decision. He honestly undermines him. But readers were just surprised that he stuck around in the yellow room anyways. I mean, he just kept punching and he was kind of losing. Batman was beating him up a lot. And Batman was distracting him, so at the same time, Boy Wonder steals the power ring from Green Lantern. If you're not gonna use it, you might as well lose it. See ya. He then gets beat up even more. Like, dude, did they paint the town yellow or just this room? Walk out of the room, be like, hey guys, I'll see you in the lobby. Good luck. Number 7, Robin's Hurdle. So sure, Robin's pretty sweet being able to sneak the ring off and all, but what if I told you that athletic equipment stopped Robin dead in his tracks once before? Teen Titans Volume 1, Issue 4, way back in the 60s. The team was curious when a young sprinter won a race to qualify for the Olympics, but he just kept running after, like he was cursed, which is pretty scary if you think about it. Imagine not being able to stop running, like Forrest Gump style. Ooh. Scary. Now at the same time, Green Arrow's sidekick Speedy needed their help as well because he was being attacked when he was practicing for some Olympic stuff as well. Some guy tried to sabotage his arrows. This organization called Diablo was behind it all. So there's a clear type of villain out here with a clear project. So the Teen Titans traveled to Tokyo just to make sure the Olympics went smoothly, and Diablo met them there. He took the team down so easily, and Robin gets caught because he can't break out of 5 loose hurdles. And that's it. That's the nail in the coffin. The entire team at that point is captured and put in the rings of the Olympics. And then of course, our guest Titan is blindfolded and is about to shoot a bunch of arrows. What a mess. Now eventually Speedy figures it out and the team is saved, but like Speedy had to save all of them. Number 6, Mugged with a Crossbow. Green Lantern, Green Arrow, issue 85. This is so insane. Now the issue is front and center and it's talking about so already it's like a very aggressive issue. The first few pages, we see Oliver Queen walking at night and he's in a bad mood. There's some girl problems and some punks try and rob him. Now, it's not like he was tired. He didn't just come back from saving the day. He was actually in a pretty bad mood. Like I said, he had lady troubles. He was ready to fight. He was actually looking for a fight. He was glad they came along. Otherwise, he said he'd have to go home and punch the walls instead. Kyle style, you know? He was ready to go and he was fighting these punks off that were trying to rob him. And then one of them pulled out a crossbow because apparently it's Van Helsing and then, you know, muggers have crossbows all of a sudden. And then Ollie gets shot through the shoulder. He didn't even like regard the guy. He's like, oh, arrows. I know my way around that. Like, it's still an arrow. You're still made of skin. Of course. Number 5, Tony and Dr. Doom. So before we talk about this one, we're gonna fill you in a little bit on Doreen Green. She made her comic book debut in Marvel Superheroes Volume 2, Issue 8, back in the early 90s. Now she was born with these squirrel-like abilities. Her name is Squirrel Girl. She has a tail. Right, you get it. She learned that she could communicate with squirrels at a young age. She was 10. So in an early comic book, she took on Dr. Doom at one point. In Marvel Superheroes Issue 8, she bumps into Tony Stark and she's showing off, right? She wants him to see what she can do. It's pretty impressive for a pitch. Squirrels start coming in out of nowhere. It's like a musical. It's nice. And then she commands them all to jump onto Tony, and even he's impressed. He's like, wow, this is crazy. And then in comes Dr. Doom to make things even more crazy. Doom interrupts Stark's electronics, and just like that, Tony is out of the fight, which was going to be my main point here. But in order to save Tony, Squirrel Girl had to send a horde of squirrels onto Doom's ship to get him out. That's how Tony Stark needs to be saved, a bunch of squirrels. Now these squirrels weren't part of the Avengers, they were just able to be controlled by Doreen. So no idea how these squirrels with little hands took down Doctor Doom. They didn't even get a chance to fight. Doctor Doom saw all this and he was like, I'm out of here. The Avengers, I can fight. A bunch of squirrels? No, that's where I draw the line. And then Doreen later joined the Avengers in their 2017 run. What a time. Number 4, Wolverine gets even more ripped. In our last video, we broke down some ultimate Wolverine facts and his super cool adamantium skeleton that isn't as strong as it is in our regular Marvel 616 universe. Now, it still sounds like a pretty good time. You have adamantium laced into your bones, like the Terminator almost. But one time, Magneto used that weakened adamantium against him. It's just as horrible as you're probably imagining. This all takes place during the Fatal Attractions event, and honestly, I got goosebumps reading this. The adamantium mixed with his bones wasn't that strong, so Magneto pulled the adamantium out and it was like water coming out of his body. It was loose, it was liquidy, and it probably didn't feel good. Professor X thankfully wiped his mind after he healed, which is great, but what about us? I need my mind erased after I just saw that. Are you kidding? Just gonna live in my head rent-free. Number 3, The Flash vs. Turtle Man. The Flash is the fastest man alive, but in his debut comic, it was a bit of a rocky start for the Scarlet Speedster. In Showcase issue 4, his powers are presented to him. He sees food in the air, it's a great time, it's super speedster. Now when Barry comes across the slowest man on Earth, the Turtle Man, appropriately named, it's actually quite challenging. It takes him a few tries to get to him. Barry runs into a wall at first because there's a painting on it and he thought that was Turtle Man. So he runs into it Roadrunner style. He runs right through the wall. Bonk, okay, weird. And then the chase continues because Turtle Man gets in a rowboat and takes off in the water. But Barry doesn't have a boat, right? But no boat, no problem. Barry now realizes he can run on water. So now the fight should be over in at least 3 seconds. Barry still can't get a hold of this guy in a rowboat. He keeps running by him and he's just missing the boat. It's so infuriating. Now eventually Barry whips a few donuts around him, but I mean, it's not like the rowboat was doing zigzags. He was going 3 miles an hour, just straight. Number 2, The Punch. This one comes from Justice League issue 5. Now in this comic, Batman came in to take over the Justice League International, and Guy Gardner, Green Lantern, doesn't share the same enthusiasm as the rest of the team. He makes it pretty clear for more than one issue that he doesn't like this new leader. Although Batman is clearly a better fit, but whatever. So he got so upset that he challenged Batman to a fight without the use of his power ring. So Batman's like, all right, let's do this. And then Batman knocked him out with one punch. Blue Beetle got jazzed. He was like Joe Rogan at a UFC night. He was like, one punch, one punch. Oh my God, he was losing his mind. This is a great moment and a greater lesson. Don't take the ring off that makes you a superhero, or else you're just a regular guy fighting Batman. Literally. And finally, number 1, Bruiser vs. Wolverine. Runaways issue 12. We see Logan and Molly Hayes, aka Bruiser, have a rather quick fight. Now, at this time, Wolverine was a member of the New Avengers, and he's trying to get to the bottom of what happened to Dagger. So he, Cap, and Iron Man went to find help from the Runaways, seeing as the signs were leading to Cloak being responsible. Now, Molly, right off the bat, okay, she's one of the strongest superheroes ever, but how she handled Wolverine was way too easy, especially now that he's an Avenger. Like, he's on the top of his game. So the big 3 walk into the cathedral. Cap calmly asks her to stop screaming, and Wolverine and him are not going to hurt her. The screaming continues, and Wolverine asks if she's heard of heightened senses, right? It probably didn't feel good. He gives her 3 seconds to stop drilling a hole into his brain. He counts 3, 2, and then the next page he was outside face down in the snow. Just like that. One hit, bam, he was eliminated. And then when he comes back in, he's actually embarrassed. I mean, fair. He just whispers how he won't tell anybody about tonight if they don't. It's kind of funny. Then he brushes snow off, but like, you're an Avenger, Wolverine. Come on, you should have seen any of this coming. There you have it, guys. Some superheroes have an off day, okay? It's not just us.
Coming in at number 10, we have Don't Mess with Batman. It will always be somewhat of a mystery as to how Guy Gardner is able to hold on to his lantern ring. The dude is kind of rude and childish, but I will admit he has pulled off some pretty impressive things as a lantern. He's just not what you would expect from a member of the most renowned space cops. And there have been plenty of times when Guy has crossed the line, like when he was forced to work under Batman with the Justice League International. Guy didn't think this made any sense. Why was a dude in a bat suit telling him what to do? Why was Guy Gardner not the one who was running the team? So Guy kept going on about how he should have been at the helm. He was whining, complaining, and insulting Batman. So Batman wanted to get everyone in order the fastest way possible and one-punched Guy Gardner. He literally knocked the dude out, a Green Lantern, in one shot. So if Guy had any questions about who should be in charge, they would have all been answered as soon as he woke up and put his nose back in place. This was hero on hero, but for Guy this was still pretty damn embarrassing to get floored from one shot. Coming in at number 9, we have the Lantern Club. I mean, if I was a villain with super strength, I would have done the same move. It's really killing two birds with one stone, or two supers with one super. If you flip open the comic Countdown to Crisis issue 3, you will see two heroes squaring off against one villain. In the hero's corner, you have Troya and Hal Jordan, a powerful team up that would normally come out victorious. And in the villain's corner, we have Mary Marvel, a villain that sounds like she should be in a straight-to-DVD Christmas special, but in this encounter, she showed that she's no slouch. When she takes on the two do-gooders, she quickly knocks down Troya and then snags Hal by his ankle, and then proceeds to beat Troya with Hal using the lantern like a club. And just like that, you have both of them bloodied and beaten. Really, that was the most effective way to get the job done. Coming in at number 8, we have Spider-Man versus the Spot. The Spot will go down as one of the worst Spider-Man villains ever, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't able to get one over on Spidey. For those of you who don't know, the Spot is a villain that is covered with small portals all over his body. Think of him as the game portal, where you go in one portal and you come out the other, even if it defies the laws of physics. In their encounter, Spider-Man tries to punch the Spot and ends up clocking himself in the face. It was like a grade school bully going, "Stop hitting yourself. Stop hitting yourself." Coming in at number 7, we have Pants Punched and KO'd. Not all supers come from Marvel and DC, so when I get a chance, I like to sneak in some moments from outside the superhero norms. For this one, we're gonna head into the world of anime to one of my favorite shows, My Hero Academia. In season 1, we have the Sports Festival, where new promising heroes go up against each other for the entertainment of the people. In this tournament, we see Aoyama, who has a belly laser power similar to Cyclops, but it comes out of his stomach. He goes up against Ashido, who has acid powers. The two square off in a short scrap that ends with Ashido blasting Aoyama's belt line with acid. This causes his pants to fall down, and Ashido slides in and uppercuts him unconscious. So getting knocked out while you're scrambling to pull up your pants, yeah, that's one of the worst ways to go out. Coming in at number 6, we have Packing on the Pounds. You only have to look at comic books for about 4 seconds to get enough unrealistic body standards to give an entire generation of people body dysmorphia. So when one hero puts on enough pounds that he couldn't even use his powers, that really sticks out, especially when your power is how fast you can move. I mean, if this was to happen to the Blob, I don't think anyone would notice. Being big is kind of his thing. Who were we talking about? Well, of course, the Flash. When we zoom back to the Silver Age of comics, we find an issue when one of the Flash's arch enemies, Gorilla Grodd, comes up with a plan to stop the speedster from running, and it's simple but effective. He makes him get so fat that he can't use his powers anymore. Grodd zaps the Flash with a ray that makes him retain water without him knowing. This made him bulk up until he literally weighed a ton. It would be pretty embarrassing to go from the fastest man alive to the star of My 600-Pound Life. Coming in at number 5, we have Wolverine Gets a Girl's Touch. Known for being one of the coolest characters in the Marvel Universe, it must have hurt to have his body tossed through building after building from one shot from a 12-year-old girl. In issue 12 of The Runaways, Wolverine is hot on the tail of Cloak. He eventually tracks down Cloak, and lo and behold, he's being protected by Molly Hayes, aka Princess Powerful. He tries to negotiate, but things turn violent pretty quickly. Downside for Logan is that Molly is probably one of the strongest mutants ever, and with one touch he's fired out of there like a snot rocket in the shower. Getting beat up by a girl must have not been the easiest emotional scar to get rid of. Coming in at number 4, we have the Yellow Room. Lanterns are very particular about colors. Some are good, some are bad, and there's a spectrum, blah 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 blah. While in All-Star Batman and Robin, we see Hal Jordan get pranked, triggered, and beat up by his least favorite color, yellow. Batman is going out of his way to mess with Hal Jordan, decides to explore his artistic side and paint a room yellow. That's quite the statement. This of course sets Hal off when he walks in, but I don't think he was ready for what was about to happen next. A young Robin slips in and manages to pickpocket Hal's ring right off his finger, and then the teenager whoops his ass. Losing your ring, getting humiliated in a yellow room, and getting KO'd by a teenager, that is a rough one. Coming in at number 3, we have Superman is trusting and dumb. Not how you would think to describe the Man of Steel, but when you hear how Lex Luthor was able to trick him, you'll be on my side. There was a comic where Superman is approached by a tailor, a guy who seemed to be a kind fellow who just wanted to do a good deed for the man who keeps the city safe. You can tell that this is an older comic. When was the last time a tailor approached you randomly and offered to make you a suit? Well, this mystery man offers to give the Man of Steel a brand new suit that will freshen up his image. Superman thinks this is amazing and accepts. The tailor makes him this suit, and without questioning anything, he puts it on. I think this might have been a case of superhero privilege. You think that you should be getting gifts from strangers at any time of the day. Well, it turns out this generous tailor was actually Lex Luthor in disguise. You think the world's greatest hero would be on the watch for the one person who's trying to kill him 24/7, but I guess he let this one slip. Oh, and there's more. Lex Luthor planted a trap in the suit. He sewed a lead-covered clump of kryptonite into the suit, which Superman never noticed. He didn't take the half second to look at the suit with his X-ray vision. Nope, there's literally a bomb in his clothes that will expose him to his weakness at the worst moment, and it was given to him in person by his arch-enemy. Lex Luthor would have had to put Superman through a whole fitting process, and he still didn't pick up on it. Coming in at number 2, we have Tin Can Iron Man. As time goes on, we have seen heroes and villains become more intricate. The way that they fight, how they can be beaten, how they use their powers. For the most part, all of these things have become more exciting. But when some heroes were originally crafted, they didn't have such interesting pieces to them. For this slip up, let's head all the way back to Avengers number 2. In this issue, the team of Earth's mightiest heroes has an enemy they never thought they would have to face, themselves. Well, kinda. See, they take on Space Phantom. This is a villain who can copy any form exactly. There's literally nothing off about his imitations, and this was his plan to beat the Avengers by turning them on each other. This was Civil War before Civil War. At first the Avengers are fooled, but then they learn his tricks, and while the Space Phantom is a perfect imitation of Iron Man, Thor is able to stop him by making it rain. And not in the cool way, he didn't throw a stack of cash in his face. Literally, rain comes down and it rusts the perfect imitation of Iron Man so he can't move. I know some of you at home are going to complain because it was Space Phantom that was beaten and not Iron Man, but it was a perfect imitation of Iron Man, meaning that Iron Man could have also be beaten by rust, which is one of the most embarrassing things that Iron Man could have learned about himself. And coming into the number 1 spot, we have the Justice League losing to Killer Frost. There's no shortage of villains that have ice powers. When it comes to Killer Frost, she's okay. She's never really had a moment to shine. She isn't really a villain that any S-tier hero would even bother with. She would be happy to see Elastic Man show up to fight her. But there was one time when her and the Suicide Squad were taking on the Boy in Blue, and Enchantress was able to smash Superman so hard he was laying on the ground immobilized. Soup has always had trouble with magic users. Well, Killer Frost was there and saw this as a golden opportunity. She used her powers to suck Superman's energy dry, draining him of his life force and his powers. She then flew off and took out the entire Justice League. Now, while it being hard for anyone from the League to take down someone that powerful, the fact that they let someone like Killer Frost get the drop on them, that is pretty embarrassing. This is one of the biggest upsets in comic book history.
Number 10. Batman gets punched out by Hal Jordan. Batman had a hard time getting along with the Green Lantern after his murderous incarnation as Parallax. The tension between these two came to a head in Green Lantern Rebirth, when Hal decides he's pretty much fed up with Batman's paranoia and he just socks him one. A real mean right hook right to the jaw. Batman drops from the single blow unconscious. Guy Gardner happens to be nearby, who Batman basically did the same thing to in Justice League number 5, just a one shot, boom. He's pretty happy to see Batman get what's been coming to him. It's certainly not Batman's worst defeat by a pretty wide margin, but it's definitely a serious blow to Batman's pride as well as his face, since he's basically just been knocked out with a single punch from a regular human. Then again, Batman doesn't exactly have like superpowered endurance or anything, so it does make sense that he could be brought down in one punch. What really gets me going is if Batman was so paranoid, why didn't he see this punch coming? World's greatest detective gets blindsided?
And before we continue, guys, if you want to go ahead and give us a thumbs up on our video because it goes a long way for us here at the studio. And if you don't do it, we're going to be really sad for like an entire year, so Number 9, Jason Todd. A Death in the Family is a 4-part storyline written by Jim Starlin and published in 1988, and it's one of the biggest DC moments ever in comic history. This was a huge moment in the Bat story because we see the Joker beat the second coming of Robin, Jason Todd, and when I say he beats him, I mean he beats him like to death. Yeah, he gets a crowbar and then a bomb just to end it all off. And it's more than just a beating that's so horrible. The Joker also used Jason's birth mother. Yeah, he blackmailed her in order to get closer to Jason. And then of course the Joker killed her too. So this is a double whammy. All the defeats, all the feels, our hearts. And what's even crazier about this whole thing is that it was up to the fans to decide his fate. Yeah, this actually came to life thanks to the producers allowing the readers to decide what happens next. There was a 36-hour period with a number you could call and vote for if you wanted the Joker to kill Robin or not. And it was pretty close apparently, something like 72 votes a difference, which is wild. Some fans even admitted to calling in more than once. You know, they just really wanted him out of there, eh? And this was of course a blessing in disguise because it brought us the glorious Red Hood, who we can't help but love.
Number 8, Spider-Man vs. Mysterio. When Mysterio first appeared way back in 1964, he gave Spidey a real run for his money. In this story, reports of Spider-Man robbing different stores in the night are hitting the news. Pete becomes pretty worried and thinks maybe he's going crazy, committing crimes in his sleep or something. He even considers visiting a psychiatrist at one point, but decides against it, fearing that he might ruin his secret identity. Later, a costumed being calling himself Mysterio appears at the Daily Bugle and tells Jameson that he's a crime fighter and he's here to bring Spider-Man to justice. He vanishes in a puff of smoke, leaving a note telling JJ to publish a challenge for Spider-Man to meet Mysterio on the Brooklyn Bridge for a showdown. The battle that follows is a particularly bitter defeat for Spidey, as Mysterio uses his special effects expertise to counteract Spider-Man's webbing, causing it to melt, and messes with his spider sense using a powerful mist that deadens the senses and reduces Spider-Man's reactions. Spidey is also blinded by the mist. Afterwards, Mysterio has a great photo op with Jameson, being hailed as a hero for taking on the menace of Spider-Man. Spidey uses this opportunity to hit Mysterio with a spider tracer and follows him back to his base to learn the truth behind Mysterio's evil ways, to eventually later defeat him.
Number 7, Batman, The Dark Knight Rises. Directed by, of course, Christopher Nolan, who had done the previous 2 installments, comes a pretty epic conclusion to the hit trilogy. Released in 2012, The Dark Knight Rises, as you guessed from the title alone, is about Batman rising up. But from where and why? Well, how about a broken back thanks to Bane, for starters? Yeah, this is 8 years after the Joker had a run-in with Gotham City. So now Batman has to return to take down Tom Hardy as he mumbles and frowns aggressively around town. So after Catwoman walked him into a 1v1 in the tunnels of Gotham, we get one of my favorite fight scenes from any superhero movie ever. And what I love about this scene the most is that there's no music the entire time. All you hear is Batman struggling to try and make a dent on this guy. And it makes it more realistic. There's no heroic music above that distracts you, it's just stressful. It's so stressful. I mean, you can see Bruce become more and more exhausted by the minute. Leaves you out of breath almost. And it all comes to a screeching halt when Bane picks up Bruce for one last blow, right to the spinal cord.
Spirit! Oh, your buddy!
Now, I know people give this movie a hard time, but seeing Batman get his ass kicked like this reminded me that it's not always the hero that gets the last punch.
Because they belong to me.
Number 6, Wolverine, crushed by the Punisher. The Punisher and Wolverine are a couple of rusty nails, real tough guys who don't take any guff and ask questions after the whooping is done. As such, when these guys go toe-to-toe in Punisher number 17 in 2001, they get straight to wrecking each other after a very short truce. They're both on the hunt for a guy who's been killing mobsters and leaving severed legs behind. Wolverine suspects the Punisher, and of course Punisher's prime suspect is Wolverine. These two guys have a pretty nasty showdown that does not end well for old Wolverine. Punisher literally shoots Logan's face off and then blasts him right between the legs with a machine gun. Wolverine is doubled over in pain on the ground, as you can imagine, and Punisher, realizing he can't really stop Wolverine just by hurting him, crushes Wolverine underneath a steamroller and parks it on Logan's head with just his hands sticking out. Some very effective work by the Punisher and a seriously humiliating defeat for Wolverine.
And number 5, Spider-Man and Kraven. We take a look now at Kraven's Last Hunt, published in 1987, and it has quite an interesting illustration on the front page. We see a dark suit Spider-Man crawling out of a grave covered in mud, and then in the background we read some alarming words on the tombstone, and it says, "Here lies Spider-Man." Huh, what? Okay, so this 5-part series, of course, as you would guess, centers around the death of Spider-Man in a way. But how does such a thing happen to old Sticky Pete? Well, Kraven is frustrated after his failed attempts to catch Spider-Man, so he comes up with this all-new plan that involves him shooting Spider-Man. So Kraven buries him, and even worse, he takes a Spider-Man suit and then takes his place in the world. So not only do you get defeated, but also replaced, adding insult to injury, literally. So then the new Spider-Man, our boy Kraven, now he roams New York and brutally attacks criminals, including a group that was actually assaulting Mary Jane. So then 2 weeks later, Peter wakes up from the effects of the tranquilizer that Kraven used, and he digs himself out to freedom. Now, I've woken up late, maybe I've missed a class or two before, but I mean this is just a whole nother level of stress. So when Spider-Man confronts Kraven, Kraven gets defensive. He's like, "Oh, no, buddy, I'm the real deal now, I'm doing this. You go back to your little hole. I'm doing the Spider-Man thing now, alright? Get out of here, bucko." And then Kraven releases Vermin, who is just, a bundle of joy to hang out with. He attacks Peter, thinking he was the same Spider-Man that had given him a beatdown before. And then Peter has to convince Vermin to cool her jets. Vermin is actually about to kill Peter until Kraven intervenes. I mean, talk about a messy 2 weeks, holy shit.
Number 4, Cyclops, Infinity War. Some of the heroes on this list got it pretty rough sometimes, and this defeat of Cyclops during the final battles in Infinity War is especially brutal. After Thanos had obtained the Infinity Gauntlet and performed his epic universe-altering snap, the remaining superheroes head off into space to battle against the Mad Titan. A lot of superheroes die, a testament to Thanos' epic power, but Cyclops suffers one of the worst deaths imaginable. Just as Cyclops uses one of his signature optic blasts, Thanos conjures an airtight, unbreakable cube around Cyclops' head, and, unable to use his blasts to free himself, Cyclops falls to the ground, suffocating in the cube. Captain America can't even break the cube open with a smash from his shield. A lot of the heroes who died in this event got it pretty quick. Even Cap is knocked out quickly with an epic backhand from Thanos that breaks his neck. This is a really tragic moment for all, but a super devastating defeat for Cyclops. I'm not even that big of a Cyclops fan, but the way this thing unfolded really made me feel for the guy.
Number 3, Magneto and Wolverine. Look, I bite my nails, alright, a lot. I can't even pull a hangnail some days, okay? I grab it, I count myself down, and then last minute I just bail. It's too spicy, I don't have enough willpower to do it. Now, I couldn't even imagine this next one, okay? I couldn't imagine if all of my bones got ripped out of my body at the same time. And that's exactly what happens to Wolverine when Magneto has had enough of his nonsense. So this all takes place during the Fatal Attractions event. Wolverine doesn't even have a chance to scream, apparently. The adamantium that bonded to his bones erupted outward like water bursting through a dam. That's how they put it. Ugh. And he's still breathing when this happens. I mean, if this isn't one of the worst things to go through, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, thankfully Xavier wiped Magneto's memory and then Wolverine was out of commission for a while. I mean, he had metal spikes sticking out of his body, so I don't think he's getting any grocery shopping done anytime soon.
Number 2, Superman gets beat by Alfred. Injustice, Gods Among Us had some pretty epic moments, like this crazy showdown between Batman and Superman that ends in a broken back for Batman. In this story, we visit an alternate DC universe in which Superman has gone mad and takes over the world as a dictator, after witnessing the destruction of Metropolis by the Joker and accidentally killing his pregnant wife. It's enough to drive anyone mad, really. Batman tries to stop Superman, eventually forming a rebellion against Superman's regime. Both are joined on either side by other heroes who share their feelings, and a superhero war rages on. Sometime after poor Batman has his back destroyed, Superman is confronted by Alfred, who has recently taken one of the superpowered pills Lex Luthor invented for Superman to use to create a superpowered army. What follows is an epic and totally unexpected beatdown as Alfred gets revenge for Batman, laying some serious blows on Superman with no remorse. Alfred cares deeply for Batman, and he really lets it show here, hammering Superman's head into the ground.
And number 1, Vision, Infinity War. Okay, so Patty D mentioned earlier a pretty brutal death from the Infinity War comic, but if you're not aware of the comic, maybe you'll remember this one from the movie. So the Russo brothers made what's arguably the best superhero film to date. I mean, all of these characters who led their own franchise crammed into one single movie. I'm honestly impressed by how smoothly that movie runs. So we see Thanos as he walks his way through the universe collecting the cosmic Infinity Stones. First he decimates Xandar for the Power Stone, and then gives Loki the old Chokey for the Space Stone, even popping some blood vessels in his face at the same time. He momentarily turns Drax and Mantis into Silly String and Flesh Cubes, and he throws Gamora off of a cliff for the Soul Stone and stabs Iron Man, forcing Strange to hand over the Time Stone. But they save the best and most heartbreaking for last, the Mind Stone. The stone that is Vision. So after a last effort attempt of removing the stone in Wakanda, his lover, Wanda, Scarlet Witch, is forced to destroy it in order for Thanos not to get it. So while holding back Thanos this entire time, she has to kill her lover. She does so successfully, and we felt the pain. The theater sat silent as we tried to comprehend that this actually just happened. But then Thanos uses the most recent installment on his glizzy gauntlet, the Time Stone. He then brings Vision back to life in front of Wanda, grabs him by his neck as well, and then pulls the stone out, leaving Vision's lifeless and colorless body to plop on the ground. And what's crazy about this is that he wasn't even using another Infinity Stone to pull that out. He just digs through vibranium with raw strength and he plucks it out, again like a hangnail. Crazy.